A millionaire CEO, single for 28 years, fell in love at first sight with the poor girl sleeping at the bus stop without having any idea who she really was. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Alexander Reed was walking quickly toward his car when, as he turned the corner, something made him stop. On the bench of an almost empty bus stop, a young woman was curled up, sleeping. The light coat she wore wasn't enough to protect her from the cold night wind, and her hands were slightly trembling over a stack of crumpled resumes. Alexander stopped in front of her, not really sure why. He could have just kept walking, gotten in his car, gone back to his penthouse where no one ever bothered him. But something about her made him pause. A strange sense of familiarity. Her features, even pale and hidden under messy hair, stirred an old memory, a place, an image, a feeling. For a moment he just stood there, watching. His heart was beating faster for no logical reason. Alexander, known for his almost mechanical emotional control, was standing in front of a complete stranger and didn't know why. In a quiet gesture, he took off the thick wool coat he was wearing and gently laid it over the girl's shoulders. She didn't wake up. She stayed asleep, exhausted. Maybe she couldn't even feel the cold anymore. The resumes slipped slightly from her hands, and he gently put them back in place. Alexander hesitated for a few seconds, and then, on impulse, pulled a small music box from his pocket. It was old, made of dark wood with carvings that had faded over time. He had carried it for years, without really knowing why. A childhood keepsake from a time when he still believed in things that life had erased. Without knowing exactly why, he placed it next to her on the bench. He stepped back and looked at her for a few more seconds. Then he turned, walked to the car, and got in. The driver greeted him, but Alexander didn't respond. He just looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see the bench in the distance, until it disappeared from view. During the ride, he kept his eyes fixed on the darkness outside the window. He couldn't understand what he had just done. The gesture made no sense at all. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't the kind of man who got moved by a glance or a sleeping face. But something about that girl had touched a forgotten string inside him. A muffled sound, an echo of something he couldn't name. Back in his quiet apartment, when he sank onto the sofa, he noticed the missing weight of his coat on his shoulders. He closed his eyes. He saw her again, sleeping, her fingers clutched around the papers, her breath shaky. The music box beside her. And then he thought, "Who are you?" And yet Alexander had this strange, deep feeling that it wouldn't be the last time he saw her. Meanwhile, the loud noise of the bus pulling in made Emily jump awake, nearly falling off the bench. She blinked several times, trying to organize the confused thoughts swirling in her head. Where was she? Oh, right. The bus stop. She had fallen asleep, waiting for the last bus of the night after another long, frustrating day of failed job interviews. But something was different. Very different. First, she wasn't cold anymore. A heavy and incredibly soft coat was draped over her shoulders, carrying a masculine scent she'd never smelled before. It was a sophisticated mix of wood and spices that, for some strange reason, made her feel protected and safe. "What?" Emily murmured, touching the fine fabric. It was clearly expensive, the kind she only saw in the windows of fancy stores downtown, the ones she never dared to enter for fear of embarrassment. Then her eyes locked on the object next to her on the bench. A small, dark wooden music box with delicate carvings that seemed to tell old stories. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, and not because of the cold night air. "I've seen this little box before," she whispered to herself, picking it up with trembling fingers. The surface felt smooth and familiar under her touch, as if her hands already knew every curve, every detail. But how did it end up here? The bus honked impatiently, and the driver shouted through the open window, "You getting on or what, miss? I don't have all night." Emily jumped up, almost tripping over her own feet. Yes, sorry." She quickly gathered her crumpled resumes, still wearing the mysterious coat and holding the music box like it was a treasure. As she stepped onto the bus, she almost slipped on the wet steps. "Careful there, young lady," grumbled the driver, a burly man with a thick Boston accent. "Now, this ain't no amusement park. Sorry, sir, it's just that well, it's a long story. Emily laughed nervously as she searched her pocket for coins to pay the fare. She found the exact amount, as if it were a small miracle. She sat on a seat near the window, still holding the music box tightly. The bus rumbled along Boston's bumpy streets, but Emily barely noticed the motion. All her attention was focused on the object in her hands. Carefully, as if handling something sacred, she opened the lid of the box. Immediately, a soft and melancholic melody began to play. The first notes hit Emily like lightning, making her heart race in a way she couldn't explain. Tears began to fill her eyes without warning. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something much deeper and harder to describe. It was as if that music touched a part of her soul that had been asleep for years. An overwhelming sense of familiarity surrounded her, as if that melody were part of who she was, a missing piece of her identity lost to time. "Why am I crying?" she murmured to herself, wiping the tears away with the back of her hand. "It's just a song." But it wasn't just a song. It was much more than that. It was like those notes were the key to a locked door in her memory, a door she didn't even know existed. Blurred fragments of images danced in her mind. A large, cold place, other children, a dark-haired boy who always made her laugh. "Next stop, Commonwealth Street," the driver announced, interrupting her thoughts. Emily quickly closed the box, as if that could hold back the emotions she didn't understand. The coat was still wrapped around her shoulders, giving her a warm, comforting hug she didn't want to let go of. When she finally arrived at the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates, Emily tiptoed inside so she wouldn't wake anyone. Sarah, her roommate who worked the night shift at a hospital, had left a note on the fridge. "Emily, there's leftover pizza in the oven. And stop blaming yourself about the interviews. You'll get there." Emily smiled for the first time that day. Sarah always knew what to say to cheer her up. She grabbed a cold slice of pizza and sat at the small kitchen table, still wrapped in the mysterious coat with the music box in front of her. "Okay, let's break this down," she said out loud, as she often did when she needed to organize her thoughts. "First, I woke up with a designer coat that definitely isn't mine. Second, I found a music box that makes me cry for no reason. Third, I might be going crazy." She laughed at herself. She'd always had the habit of talking to herself when she was confused or nervous. Her roommates had gotten used to hearing monologues coming from her room. Emily opened the box again, letting the melody fill the apartment's silence. This time, she was able to control herself better, although the feeling of familiarity remained strong. "All right, little mystery box," she said, looking at the object as if it might respond. "Do you want to tell me how you ended up in my life? Because I'm pretty sure I didn't buy you, and my current budget does not allow for fancy gifts to myself." The box, of course, didn't answer. But Emily was sure there was a story behind all of it. Someone had placed that box beside her, the same person who had left the coat. But who? And why? She examined the coat more closely. It was clearly a man's coat made of a fabric she couldn't even pronounce. There was an inner label with a brand she'd only seen in fashion magazines, Armani. Her eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared under her bangs. "My goodness," she whispered. "Whoever left this must have more money than I'll see in my entire life." Emily got up and carefully placed the music box inside her backpack, along with the crumpled resumes. Tomorrow would be another day of job hunting, and she had a strange feeling that this little box might bring her luck. It was silly, of course, but after the terrible day she'd had, she was willing to believe in anything that might change her luck. Before going to bed, Emily held the coat close to her chest for a moment, breathing in the comforting scent. Whoever it belonged to, she hoped to thank them in person someday. It's not every day someone receives such a kind and unexpected gesture from a complete stranger. Across town, in his quiet penthouse, Alexander Reed stood by the large window of his apartment, unable to get the image of the sleeping young woman on the bench out of his mind. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But something about her had awakened a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. And while Boston slept around them, 2 lives that had briefly crossed paths in the dark of night were starting to intertwine in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Alexander Reed adjusted his tie for the 3rd time that morning, a small unconscious gesture that revealed an unusual kind of nervousness, Seated at his polished mahogany desk on the top floor of Reed Enterprises, he tried to focus on the quarterly report spread out in front of him. But his mind kept drifting back to the night before. His secretary, Margaret, an efficient woman in her early 50s who had worked with him for over a decade, walked into the office carrying a tray of coffee and a daunting stack of documents. "Mr. Reed," she said, using the professional tone all employees adopted when speaking to him, "your morning meetings start in 15 minutes. The finance team is waiting in the conference room." Alexander nodded without looking up from the papers. "Thank you, Margaret, and cancel my lunch with Henderson. I'm not in the mood for his bad jokes today." Margaret hesitated for a moment. In all her years working with Alexander, she had rarely seen him this distracted. "Is everything all right, sir? You seem different today." "I'm fine," he replied, finally looking up at her. "Just tired." But the truth was, Alexander hadn't slept well. The image of the young woman on the bus stop bench remained vivid in his mind, as if it had been burned there. Something about her had stirred up old memories. Fragments he usually preferred to keep buried. The morning meetings went as they always did. Nervous employees presenting charts, Alexander asking pointed questions that put everyone on edge, and an overall atmosphere of tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. No one dared joke or relax around him. It had been that way for years. "Third quarter numbers show a 3% drop," said Bradley, the finance director, adjusting his glasses nervously. "But we believe that with the measures we've implemented—" "Bradley?" Alexander interrupted, his voice cold and precise. 3% might not sound like much to you, but that's millions in lost revenue. What exactly is your plan to recover that loss?" The man swallowed hard, and Alexander could almost hear the sweat dripping from his forehead. It was always like this, respect mixed with fear, efficiency masked by tension. After 2 hours of meetings that felt endless, Alexander decided to head down to the ground floor to check some reports from the HR department himself. It wasn't something he normally did. He preferred having the information brought to him. But that day, he felt an unusual restlessness. The elevator slid silently down the building's 30 floors, and when the doors opened in the lobby, Alexander saw the usual morning rush. Busy executives, delivery workers, visitors waiting at reception, and then he saw her. At the front desk, a young woman was handing an envelope to the receptionist. She wore simple clothes, a slightly wrinkled white blouse, and a black skirt that had seen better days. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she held an old synthetic leather folder that looked like it had been through many battles. Alexander's heart almost stopped. It was her, the girl from the bench. Even dressed differently, standing straighter and with more determination, he recognized her instantly. The delicate features, the way she bit her lower lip when nervous, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the strap of her folder. Alexander took a step toward the front desk, but froze when he saw her turn to leave. She walked past him, less than 2 meters away. But she didn't look at him. She was too focused on her own concerns to notice the man in the expensive suit watching her with quiet intensity. "Thank you," he heard her say to the receptionist. "I hope you'll consider my application." And then she was gone, disappearing through the building's revolving door as if she'd never been there. Alexander stood in the middle of the lobby for a few seconds, ignoring the polite greetings from employees walking past him. His mind was still processing what he had just seen. She was looking for a job. She had just handed in a resume at his company. The rest of the day passed in a haze of distraction. Alexander sat through more meetings, signed documents, made decisions that would impact thousands of employees, but his mind was elsewhere. He found himself staring out the window more than usual, almost as if he hoped to catch sight of her again on the busy streets of Boston. The next day, an uncontrollable curiosity made him pick up the phone to call Margaret. "I want to see yesterday's new hires report," he said, trying to sound casual. "All of the new hires, sir?" Margaret looked surprised. Alexander rarely showed interest in entry-level hiring details. "Yes, all of them." When the report landed on his desk, Alexander reviewed it line by line until he found what he was looking for. Among the new employees for the night shift, a cleaner had been hired to work on the executive floors. Emily Carter. Emily. Now he knew her name. That evening, Alexander did something completely out of the ordinary. Instead of going straight home after work, he stayed in the building. He told Margaret he'd be working late, but in truth, he was waiting. Around 9 o'clock, when most of the daytime staff had already left, Alexander went down to the 25th floor. The hallways were quiet, lit only by emergency lights and the occasional glow from an office where someone had forgotten to turn off the lights. He walked the halls, trying to appear casual, as if he were just checking on things. That's when he heard voices coming from the security post. "The new cleaner seems nice," said one of the guards, Robert, a big man who had worked the night shift for over 15 years. "Emily, right?" She said she started yesterday. "Yeah," the other guard, Jimmy, replied. "I saw her with the cleaning cart on the 23rd floor. She looks like a hard worker." Alexander felt his heart speed up. She was there, in the building, at that very moment. Without thinking much about what he was doing, he headed for the elevator and went down one floor. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Alexander stepped out onto the 24th floor. The lighting was dimmer there, casting long shadows along the walls. He followed the faint sound of wheels squeaking on the marble floor. And then he saw her. Emily was pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway, her hair tied up in a practical bun, wearing a simple blue company uniform. She was focused on her task, wiping door handles with smooth, efficient motions. When she looked up and saw him at the end of the hallway, their eyes met. For a moment that felt like it lasted forever, they just looked at each other. Emily tilted her head slightly, as if trying to remember where she might have seen that man before, but nothing came to mind. To her, Alexander was just another executive working late. "Good evening," she said politely before turning her attention back to the cleaning cart. "Good evening," Alexander replied, his voice sounding rougher than usual. Emily went back to work, and Alexander stood there for a few more seconds before returning to the elevator. When the doors closed, he leaned against the wall and shut his eyes. She hadn't recognized him. To Emily, he was a complete stranger. But to Alexander, she was the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't even realized he was trying to solve. And now, for the first time in years, Alexander Reed had something to look forward to beyond reports and meetings. He had a mystery to unravel, a connection to explore. He had Emily. On her third night working at Reed Enterprises, Emily was starting to get used to the routine. She had learned where the cleaning supplies were kept, figured out which elevator was fastest to the upper floors, and even discovered that the 12th floor bathroom had the best toilet paper in the entire building. "Okay, Emily," she murmured to herself as she pushed the cleaning cart down the 27th floor hallway. Third night and still not fired. That has to be some kind of personal record. The building was practically empty at that hour. Only a few lights remained on in offices where some workaholics were still working late. Emily liked the silence. It was relaxing after full days of job hunting and hearing more no's than a parent trying to get a 2-year-old to eat broccoli. She had just finished cleaning 3 offices in a row when she reached the end of the hallway. There, a door was slightly open, and she could hear a deep voice talking on the phone. Emily hesitated for a moment. Should she clean that office now, or wait for the person to finish the call? Decisions, decisions, she whispered to herself, looking at the cart full of cleaning products. If I wait, I'll have to come back later. If I go in now, I might interrupt an important conversation. But if the person wanted complete privacy, they wouldn't have left the door open, right? Emily decided she'd be quick and quiet. She took only the bucket with soap water and a cloth, leaving the rest of the cart in the hallway. That way, she'd make less noise. She walked up to the slightly open door, trying to peek in without being noticed. Through the gap, she could see a man with his back turned, speaking on the phone with a firm, commanding voice. He wore a suit that looked like it cost more than her apartment rent. "The numbers from last quarter are unacceptable," the man said. "I want a meeting with all departments on Monday, and this time I want solutions, not excuses." Emily swallowed hard. He was clearly someone important. Maybe it was better to come back later. She started to back away, and that's when disaster struck. As she stepped back, Emily bumped the door with her shoulder. It opened a little wider with a sharp creak. The sound startled her, and she lost her balance. The bucket of soapy water slipped from her hands like it had a life of its own. What happened next felt like it played out in slow motion, like one of those movie scenes where everything goes wrong at once. The bucket flew in a perfect arc, dumping its entire contents directly onto the shoes of the man on the phone. Emily froze. She didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move. She was like a bronze statue in the middle of the office, except bronze statues don't blush from embarrassment. The man stopped speaking mid-sentence. Slowly, like a predator spotting prey, he turned around. It was Alexander Reed, the CEO, the most feared man in the entire building, and she had just soaked him with dirty soap water. Emily stammered, feeling like the floor might open up and swallow her whole. Mr. Reed, oh my goodness. Alexander looked down at his Italian leather shoes, now drenched in cloudy water. Then he looked up at Emily, who seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown right there. Let me call you back, he said into the phone, keeping his eyes on Emily. Something unexpected just came up. Emily went into full panic mode. She dropped to the floor and started trying to dry his shoes with a cleaning rag, which only spread more water across the marble floor. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. Sorry, she said, frantically rubbing his shoes. I'll fix this. I have special soap, vinegar, baking soda, holy water if you're religious, whatever you need. Alexander looked down at the young woman who was practically kneeling at his feet, trying desperately to undo the damage. It was both a ridiculous and touching sight. There she was, the girl from the bench, the same person who had been on his mind for days, now in total panic because of his wet shoes. Holy water? He asked, and Emily paused for a second. Well, I don't have it with me right now, but I can get some, she said quickly. My neighbor, Mrs. Martha, always has some. She says it's good for everything, from blessing a new home to getting rid of bad luck. And looking at this situation, I definitely need to get rid of some bad luck. Then something completely unexpected happened. Alexander Reed, the man who hadn't smiled in years, the CEO who made employees nervous just by being in the elevator, felt the corners of his mouth begin to lift. It was a small smile, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. For the first time in years, someone had made him smile, truly smile. Emily was still on the floor, trying to dry the floor with the now-soaked rag. I can pay to have the shoes cleaned, she said. It might take me 6 months, but I'll do it. Or I can work overtime for free. Or I can... Well, I'm out of good ideas at this point. Stand up, Alexander said softly. Emily stopped talking and looked up. Sir? Stand up, he repeated. It's all right. All right, Emily slowly stood up, still holding the wet rag. Mr. Reed, I just turned your shoes into a kiddie pool. How is that all right? Alexander watched her for a long moment. She stood there in her wet uniform, hair falling out of its bun, holding a dripping cloth. And yet, there was something about her that fascinated him. The way she didn't hesitate to speak her mind, even in such an awkward moment. The way she tried to fix things instead of running away. They're just shoes, he finally said. Emily blinked several times, like she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. They're just shoes, Mr. Reed. Those shoes probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. And I can buy another pair, Alexander replied, keeping his tone calm. But I got your shoes all wet, Emily insisted. And I soaked your floor and interrupted your important call. And, she paused to catch her breath, and I probably broke about 15 company rules all at once. Alexander took a step back from the puddle, making a splashing sound with his wet shoes. The sound made Emily shrink in embarrassment all over again. What's your name? He asked. Emily, she answered automatically. Emily Carter. And before you ask, yes, that's my real name. And no, I don't usually spill water on my bosses. This is definitely a first for me. Emily, Alexander repeated, testing how the name sounded in his voice. It was exactly how it had appeared in the hiring report, but hearing it from her lips felt different. How long have you been working here? 3 days, Emily said, wringing the cloth nervously. And depending on how mad you are, those might have been my only 3 days. Alexander studied her for a moment. She was different from any employee he'd ever interacted with. There was no forced obedience, no paralyzing fear that he was used to seeing. Emily was nervous, yes, but she was also sincere, authentic, and that was something he hadn't encountered in a long time. "Are you new to the cleaning staff?" he asked. "New to cleaning, new to not splashing important people, new to pretty much everything," Emily sighed. "But I'm learning, and I promise next time I'll keep the bucket far away from anyone in an expensive suit." Alexander nodded slowly. "Well, Emily Carter," he said, "I suggest you finish cleaning this floor, and maybe be more careful with the buckets." Emily blinked, confused. So I'm not fired?" "You're not fired. Are you sure?" "Because I can leave right now if it makes things easier for you. No problem. No hard feelings." "I'm sure." Emily let out a sigh of relief so deep it seemed to empty her lungs completely. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. Really. You're much nicer than people say." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What do people say?" Emily froze again, realizing she'd said too much. "Well, nothing bad. Just that you're demanding and focused, and," she swallowed hard, "that it's best not to spill water on your shoes." For the second time that evening, Alexander almost smiled. "Smart advice. Right?" Emily laughed nervously. "Well, I'm gonna keep cleaning now, and I'll stay far away from any water buckets." She turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Mr. Reed, thanks for not firing me, and sorry about the shoes. Really." Alexander watched her leave the office, listening to the creaky wheels of her cart rolling down the hallway. Then he looked down at his still wet shoes and shook his head. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed was genuinely curious about someone. And that someone was a clumsy cleaning lady who had no idea who he really was behind the title and the reputation. It was refreshing. It was unexpected. And it was exactly what he didn't know he had been looking for. 2 weeks had passed since the wet shoe incident, and Emily had developed a near-scientific method to avoid similar disasters. She had mentally named it Safe Bucket Operation. Always hold it with both hands, check for obstacles within a 6-foot radius, and never, ever walk backwards while carrying liquids. That night, Emily had finished cleaning all the offices on the 22nd floor earlier than usual. The building was unusually quiet, with only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional echo of her own footsteps across the marble floors. "Well, Emily," she said to herself as she packed up the cleaning supplies on her cart, "you survived another night without soaking an executive. That definitely deserves a little celebration." She decided to take a break in the staff break room, a modest space on the 21st floor that most executives didn't even know existed. The room had a few small tables, a coffee machine that worked when it felt like it, and in the corner, almost forgotten by everyone, an old upright piano. Emily had always noticed the instrument during her breaks, but she'd never gotten close to it. That night, however, something drew her in. Maybe it was the absolute silence in the building, or maybe it was the melody from the music box still echoing in her mind since that mysterious night on the bench. "I'm just going to take a quick look," she murmured, walking toward the piano as if approaching a wild animal that might run away at any moment. The instrument was clearly old, with wood darkened by time and a few slightly yellowed keys. There was a small metal plate on the top, donated by the Morrison family, 1987. Emily wondered how many people had played it over the years, how many melodies those keys had produced. She looked around to make sure she was alone, then sat on the padded bench. The keys felt cold under her fingers as she gently tested them. The sound was a bit out of tune, but still melodic. "All right, little forgotten piano," she said fondly. "Let's see if you still remember how to work." Emily closed her eyes and let her fingers find the keys. She didn't know why, but the melody from the music box came to her naturally, as if her hands knew exactly where each note belonged. It was strange, because she didn't remember ever learning that specific song, but her fingers moved with a confidence that surprised her. The melody flowed smoothly, filling the silence of the room with a sweet melancholy. Emily got lost in the music, feeling an unexplained connection to each note. It was as if that song was somehow a part of her, like a memory stored deep within her soul. As she played, Emily didn't realize she was no longer alone. Alexander had come down from his office to check some reports in the HR department when he heard the music echoing down the hallway. He stopped instantly, recognizing the melody he knew so well. It was the exact same tune from the box he had left with her that night. Note by note, every nuance. How was this possible? Alexander quietly approached the break room, stopping at the slightly open door. Through the gap, he could see Emily sitting at the piano, completely absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with a natural grace that fascinated him. She wasn't reading sheet music, wasn't following any guide. She was playing from memory, or rather, as if the music was part of her. When Emily finished the melody, she let her hands rest on the keys for a moment, as if she didn't want to break the spell. That's when she heard a voice behind her. "You play that song? Why?" Emily turned quickly, almost falling off the piano bench. Standing in the doorway was a man she vaguely recognized from the hallways but had never seen up close. He was tall, well-dressed, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to carry some kind of invisible weight. "Sorry," Emily said automatically, getting up from the bench like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "I didn't know anyone was here. I was playing, obviously, but I didn't know someone was listening, and if it's against the rules to use the piano, I can stop right away." The man raised a hand, a small smile forming on his lips. "It's not against the rules. Actually, I think you're the first person I've seen play this piano in years." Emily breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, good. For a moment I thought I was about to get fired for—" "Well, it wouldn't be the first time I almost got fired for something unexpected." "About the song," he insisted, stepping into the room. "Why did you choose that specific melody?" Emily hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. "To be honest, I don't know. It just came to mind. It's strange, but it's like my fingers already knew where to go. You know that feeling when something seems familiar, even though you're sure you've never seen it before?" Alexander nodded slowly. He knew that feeling very well. "Yes, I do. And where did you learn to play the piano?" "I learned when I was a child," Emily replied, relaxing a bit. "There was a piano at the place where I grew up. One of the staff members taught me the basics. I'm not a professional or anything, but I've always liked to play when I need to think." "You play very well," said Alexander sincerely. "I'm Alex, by the way." "Emily," she replied, holding out her hand. "Emily Carter. I work the night cleaning shift." Alexander shook her hand, noticing how small and delicate it felt compared to his. "Nice to meet you, Emily Carter." "You work here too?" Emily asked. "I mean, obviously you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here this late, but I've never seen you during my cleaning rounds." "I work in maintenance," Alexander answered, choosing a half-truth. "Executive maintenance." "Oh, that's cool," said Emily, sounding excited. "Must be interesting." "I bet you know all the building's secrets, like where the best coffee machines are and which bathroom has the softest toilet paper." Alexander laughed, a genuine sound that caught him by surprise. "You could say that? And you? Do you play piano too?" Emily asked, gesturing toward the instrument. "A little," Alexander admitted. "But not like you. You have a natural talent." Emily blushed slightly. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say, even if it's just to be polite." "I'm not being polite," Alexander said. "I'm being honest." There was a comfortable silence between them for a moment, and then Emily sat back down on the piano bench. "Want to join me? This bench is big enough for two, and I promise not to play anything too complicated." Alexander hesitated for a moment. When was the last time he'd sat casually with someone, without schedules, reports, or business pressure? He couldn't remember. "Why not?" he said, sitting next to her on the bench. "All right, Alex from Executive Maintenance," Emily said with a playful smile. "Let's see what you can play." Alexander placed his fingers on the keys and began a simple, familiar melody. Emily joined in, creating a natural harmony that blended perfectly with his main tune. It felt like they had played together many times before. "Wow," Emily said when they finished. "We play really well together. It's like our styles match perfectly." Alexander looked at her, studying her bright expression. "They really do." "Want to hear something funny?" Emily said, turning to face him. "I have this strange feeling that we've met before. Not here at work, but somewhere else. Have you ever had that feeling with someone?" Alexander's heart beat faster. "Yes," he said softly. "It's an unexplainable feeling." "Exactly," Emily exclaimed. "It's like déjà vu, but stronger, like there's a story I should remember, but it's locked away somewhere I can't reach." They kept talking for over an hour, completely losing track of time. Emily talked about her past jobs, her struggles finding work, and her hopes for the future. Alexander, careful not to reveal too much about his real position, spoke about Boston, about music, and how life sometimes takes unexpected turns. It was the most natural and comfortable conversation Alexander had had in years. Emily had a way of talking that made him feel relaxed, like he could let his guard down and just be himself. She was funny without trying to be, smart without being full of herself, and genuinely kind in a way he had forgotten people could be. "Wow, what time is it?" Emily suddenly asked, glancing at the clock on the wall. "I can't believe so much time has passed." "Time flies when you're having fun," Alexander said, surprised to realize he truly had enjoyed himself. "It really does," Emily agreed, standing up from the bench. "Well, Alex, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope we get to talk again soon." "I hope so too," Alexander said, and for the first time in a long while, he actually meant it. As Emily left the room, Alexander stayed seated at the piano for a few more minutes. There was something about her that deeply intrigued him. The way she played that particular melody, the feeling of familiarity she mentioned, how naturally they talked. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed didn't want to avoid a human connection. He wanted to explore it, understand it, and more importantly, he wanted to find out who Emily Carter really was. In the days following their meeting at the piano, something changed in Alexander Reed's routine. For the first time in years, he found reasons to leave his top-floor office and head down to the lower levels of the building. There was always a logical excuse: checking the energy efficiency on the 22nd floor, inspecting hallway cleanliness, or reviewing nighttime safety protocols. Margaret, his secretary, started noticing the odd pattern. "Mr. Reed," she said one morning, looking at his schedule, "you've been going down to the lower floors a lot lately. Is there a specific issue I should know about?" Alexander adjusted his tie, a gesture Margaret had learned to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Just making sure all operations are running properly," he replied, keeping his tone professional. "A CEO should be familiar with every part of the company." Margaret raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In 15 years working for Alexander, she had never seen him so interested in the operational aspects of the company. That evening, once again, Alexander found himself going down to the 21st floor. It had become almost a routine. Finish the official workday, wait for most employees to leave, and then look for Emily. He found her in the break room, organizing her cleaning supplies while softly humming to herself. When she saw him, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Hi, Alex," she said cheerfully. "Another executive maintenance inspection?" Alexander smiled, feeling slightly guilty about the lie. "Something like that. And you? How was work today?" "Well, let me think," Emily said, counting on her fingers. "I managed to clean 3 entire floors without knocking anything over. No one slipped on the freshly mopped floor, and I didn't spill anything on an important executive. I'd say it was a productive day." "Still worried about the shoe incident?" Alexander asked, amused. "Worried?" Emily laughed. "Alex, I have nightmares where I'm chasing Mr. Reed through the hallways with buckets of water. I bet he still tells that story to other executives at board meetings." If she only knew, Alexander thought. "I'm sure he's completely forgotten about it." "You think so?" Emily looked relieved. "I hope so. I don't want to be known as the cleaner who splashes important people. That's not exactly the kind of reputation I'm aiming for." They walked together through the hallways as Emily wrapped up her tasks. Alexander had discovered he liked listening to her talk. She had a lively way of telling stories, turning even the most ordinary events into amusing tales. "You mentioned the other day that you grew up somewhere with a piano," Alexander said casually. "What was that place like?" Emily hesitated for a moment, and Alexander noticed a shadow cross her eyes. "It was an orphanage," she finally said. "I lived there from the age of 6 until I turned 18. "I'm sorry," Alexander said gently. "That must have been hard." "It had its moments," Emily admitted, trying to keep the tone light. "But there were good things too. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the music room, taught me to play the piano. She used to say music was like a secret language that could comfort the soul." Alexander felt something stir in his chest, a faint and distant memory. "Did you have friends there?" "A few," Emily said, a nostalgic smile forming on her face. "There was a boy. We were inseparable. He had this way of making me laugh, even on the hardest days. We spent hours listening to music together. What happened to him? He was adopted when we were about 8, Emily said, her voice growing quieter. I was happy for him, of course. Everyone deserves a family, but I missed him a lot. Alexander stopped walking, an odd feeling washing over him. There was something familiar in her story, something that stirred memories he had long buried. What was his name? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Josh, Emily replied. Joshua, actually, but everyone called him Josh. He had dark hair and eyes that always looked like they were hiding secrets. He used to say that one day he'd come back to find me. Alexander's heart nearly stopped. Joshua. Memories flooded his mind like puzzle pieces suddenly fitting together. An orphanage, a brown-haired girl, hours spent listening to music, a promise made by an 8-year-old child. Emily, he said, his voice hoarse. What was the name of the orphanage? St. Catherine's Home, she answered, looking at him curiously. Why do you ask? You look pale. Alexander tried to process what he was hearing. Could it be? After all these years, was it really possible? Alex? Emily gently touched his arm. Are you okay? Before Alexander could reply, Emily kept talking, lost in her own memories. You know, it's funny. Since we met, I've been having the strangest dreams. Bits of memories that feel real, but I can't quite place them. And that song I played on the piano, it's like it's part of a story I'm supposed to remember. Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. The delicate features, the expressive eyes, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking. How hadn't he seen it before? Emily, he said softly, do you remember anything specific about Josh? A lot of things, she said, smiling sadly. He used to make up fantastic stories to distract me when I was upset. And he had this little music box we loved to listen to together. It was our special song. Alexander's world seemed to stop. The music box. The same one he'd carried with him all these years. The same one he had left with her that night on the bench. What kind of music box? He asked, barely able to form the words. It was small, made of dark wood, with delicate carvings, Emily described, her eyes drifting into the past. It played the most beautiful melody. The same one I played on the piano the other day. Funny how some songs just stick to your soul, don't they? Alexander knew he should tell the truth right then. He should reveal who he really was, both as the CEO and as Josh from her childhood. But the words just wouldn't come. How could he explain that he'd been unknowingly searching for her all these years? How could he admit that he had lied about his identity? Alex? Emily called again, worried by his silence. Instead of speaking, Alexander did something impulsive, something that surprised him just as much as it surprised her. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. Emily didn't step back. In fact, she seemed to lean in slightly, as if some invisible force was pulling them together. Time seemed to slow down when their lips met. The kiss started gently, almost hesitantly, but quickly turned into something deeper and more intense. It was like all the lost memories, all the years apart, all the unspoken longing were being poured into that one moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Emily looked at him with a mix of surprise and recognition that left her confused. She began, touching her lips. Why do I feel like this has happened before? Alexander cupped her face in his hands, studying every detail as if he were trying to memorize it. Maybe because it already did, he said softly. In another life, in another time. Emily let out a quiet laugh, but her eyes were shining. Do you believe in things like that? Destiny? Soulmates? I didn't, Alexander admitted. Until now. They stood there, lost in each other's eyes, both feeling that something important had shifted between them. Neither of them knew yet that it wasn't just the present connecting them, but a shared past that was finally beginning to come out of the shadows. What Emily didn't know was that the man she had just kissed was both the CEO she feared and the Josh she had never forgotten. And what Alexander didn't know was that he had finally found the person his soul had been searching for all his life. A week had passed since the kiss, and Emily felt like she was floating through the halls of Reed Enterprises. She and Alex had met every night since, talking for hours in the break room or walking down the empty corridors while she finished her work. It felt like they had rediscovered a long-lost friendship, but with a new and exciting closeness. Sarah, I think I'm in love. Emily confessed to her roommate one morning as they sipped coffee in the small kitchen of their apartment. Sarah, who worked night shifts as a nurse, looked up from her newspaper with one eyebrow raised. "In love? Emily Carter, you've always said you didn't have time for romance." I know, Emily said, spinning in her chair like a teenager. "But he's different, Sarah. It's like we've known each other for years. We talk about everything, laugh about everything, and when we're together, time just disappears." "And he works at your company?" "In executive maintenance," Emily replied. He's special. He really listens to me, not just pretends while thinking about something else." Sarah smiled. "Well, I'm happy for you. Just be careful where you're walking when you're daydreaming about him. We don't want you spilling another bucket of water on some important executive." Emily laughed. "That only happened once. And Mr. Reed didn't even seem that mad." That afternoon, Emily got an unexpected call from her cleaning supervisor, Linda. "Emily, sweetheart," Linda said in her raspy smoker's voice, "I need you to cover the afternoon shift today. Jessica called in sick, and we've got an important meeting on the 30th floor that needs to be spotless." "Sure, no problem," Emily replied. "What time do you need me there?" 2:00. "And Emily, wear your newest uniform. This meeting's with the big shots." Emily arrived at the building earlier than needed, excited for the change in her usual routine. She rarely worked during the day, so it would be interesting to see the building with more people around. Maybe she'd even run into Alex by chance. Linda met her in the lobby, holding a clipboard and looking more stressed than usual. "Emily, thank you for coming," she said quickly. "I need you to clean room 30A. It's one of the main meeting rooms, right next to the CEO's conference room. Everything has to be perfect." "Got it," said Emily, grabbing her cleaning cart. "Room 30A, total perfection. I could do that with my eyes closed." "And Emily?" Linda grabbed her arm. "If you see any executives around, be discreet. They don't like being disturbed." Emily nodded and stepped into the elevator. 30th floor. It was her first time going that high up in the building. The doors opened to reveal a luxurious hallway with thick carpets, artwork on the walls, and a stunning view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Wow," Emily whispered to herself. "This place is fancier than some hotels I've stayed at." Well, hotel, singular, and it wasn't that fancy. She found room 30A easily, noticing the door was slightly open. Perfect. She could slip in, clean everything up quickly, and leave without bothering anyone. Pushing her cart down the hallway, Emily hummed softly to herself, a tune she'd heard on the radio during her commute. She was in a good mood, thinking about how she'd tell Alex all about her little adventure on the executive floors of the company. "Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living," she sang quietly, pushing the door open a bit more. That's when her life changed completely. The room wasn't empty. In fact, it was full of men in expensive suits sitting around a large conference table. And at the head of the table, leading the meeting with an air of authority Emily recognized instantly, was Alex. But it wasn't Alex, not the Alex she knew. This man looked the same, had the same voice, but everything about him was different. His posture was straighter, almost intimidating. His tone was cold and commanding, and everyone in the room treated him with a respect that could only mean one thing. "I want those numbers reviewed by Monday," he was saying when he noticed Emily standing in the doorway. No more delays or excuses. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily felt like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Her cleaning cart suddenly felt too heavy for her trembling hands. The bucket of cleaning supplies slipped from her grip, hitting the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the silent room. "Mr. Reed," one of the executives said nervously, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding." Mr. Reed. Alexander Reed, the CEO. Alex was Alexander Reed, the CEO. The man she had splashed with dirty water. The man everyone at the company feared. The man she had kissed, thinking he was just a maintenance worker. Emily looked at Alexander, and he looked at her. In his eyes she saw guilt, fear, and maybe even desperation. But all she could feel was betrayal. Emily tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely stand. "Emily," Alexander said, rising from his chair, but his voice sounded different, formal, distant, like she was just another employee who had made a mistake. But that was enough to break the trance Emily was in. Tears began streaming down her face as the reality sank in. He had lied about everything. Who he was, what he did, why he was always around. "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper. But she wasn't apologizing for the bucket or for interrupting the meeting. She was apologizing for being so naive. Emily turned and ran. She ran down the luxurious hallway, her tears blurring the view. She ran to the elevator, pressing the button over and over as if it would help her escape faster from the humiliation. Behind her, she heard Alexander calling her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She couldn't face him again, knowing it had all been a lie. When the elevator doors finally closed, Emily collapsed against the wall, sobbing. How could she have been so foolish? How had she not seen it? The expensive suits, the confident way he spoke about the company, the way he always seemed to know everything. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Emily ran straight to Linda's office. "I'd like to resign," she said, still crying. Linda looked up, alarmed. "Emily, you were on the 30th floor just 15 minutes ago." "I made a terrible mistake," Emily said, trying to steady her breathing. "I can't work here anymore." "Sweetheart, whatever happened, I'm sure we can sort it out." "We can't," Emily interrupted. "Trust me, it can't be fixed." She filled out the resignation forms with trembling hands, handed in her badge and uniform, and walked out of Reed Enterprises without looking back. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor, Alexander had ended the meeting abruptly, leaving a room full of confused executives. He rushed down to the ground floor, but Emily was already gone. "Where's Emily Carter?" he asked Linda, trying to keep his voice steady. Linda looked at him, surprised. "Mr. Reed? She just resigned. Said she made a terrible mistake and couldn't stay here anymore." Alexander felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Did she say anything else?" "No, sir. She just grabbed her things and left." Alexander went up to his office in silence, finally feeling the full weight of his lies. He had found Emily, the girl he had unknowingly been searching for his whole life, and had lost her because of his own cowardice. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed felt real fear. Not fear of losing money or business, but fear of losing the only person who had managed to see beyond the cold exterior he had built. And now she was gone, taking with her the first real chance at happiness he'd had in decades. It had been 2 months since Emily had run out of Reed Enterprises, and Alexander had buried himself in work with an intensity that even worried Margaret, his secretary. Meetings started earlier, ended later, and he reviewed every report himself as if his life depended on it. "Mr. Reed," Margaret said one particularly long afternoon, "don't you think you should take a vacation? You've been working 16 hours a day." "I'm fine," Alexander replied automatically, not looking up from the papers. But he wasn't fine. He had tried to find Emily through every possible means without coming off as a stalker. He'd discreetly checked with human resources, but she hadn't left a forwarding address. He had even driven around Boston neighborhoods where he thought she might be living, but it was as if she had simply vanished. During the day, he could distract himself with spreadsheets and contracts. But at night, when the building was quiet, Alexander would often find himself going down to the break room where they had played piano together. He would sit at the bench and play the music box melody, hoping somehow it would bring her back. It was on one of those melancholic nights that Margaret showed up at his door with a golden envelope. "Mr. Reed, this came for you," she said hesitantly. "It's an invitation to the annual benefit event for the Arts for Boston Foundation. I usually decline these kinds of things, but—" "Decline it," Alexander said without looking. "Sir, with all due respect, you need to get out of this office, and it's for a good cause. The foundation raises money for music programs in orphanages." Alexander looked up. Orphanages. Emily had grown up in an orphanage. It was a weak connection, but— "Where's the event?" "At the Harrison Gallery, in the historic district," Margaret replied, clearly surprised. "Live music, dinner, silent auction. Confirm my attendance." That Saturday night, Alexander reluctantly found himself driving downtown. The Harrison Gallery was small and charming, very different from the large corporate events he was used to. Around 50 people mingled through the intimate space, sipping wine and admiring local artwork on the walls. Alexander greeted a few familiar faces, made a generous donation to the silent auction, and was just about to leave when he heard the sound of a piano coming from the center of the gallery. His first reaction was nostalgia. For the past 2 months, any piano music reminded him of Emily. But there was something familiar about this particular melody. Very familiar. Alexander walked toward the small crowd that had gathered around the piano. Through the people, he caught sight of a young woman sitting at the instrument, her fingers gliding over the keys with natural grace. She wore a simple navy blue dress, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Then she turned her head slightly, and Alexander's world came to a stop. It was Emily. She was playing the melody from the music box exactly as she had that night in the break room. Every note was perfect, every nuance just as he remembered. Alexander couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He just stood there, watching the woman who had occupied his thoughts for 2 whole months. Emily finished the song, and the small audience applauded warmly. That's when she looked up and saw him. The smile on her face disappeared instantly. For a moment, they simply stared at each other through the small crowd, the weight of 2 months of silence hanging between them. Alexander watched as Emily stood up from the piano bench and walked toward the quieter side of the gallery. He followed her, his heart pounding harder with every step. "Emily," he said when he finally got close enough to speak without being overheard. "Alexander," she replied, and the name sounded formal in her voice. "What a surprise to see you here." "I could say the same," he said. Are you playing professionally now?" Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Hardly. I'm a piano teacher for underprivileged kids at the community center. When the gallery found out, they invited me to play at tonight's event. Apparently, live music brings in more donors." "Piano teacher," Alexander repeated. That's wonderful, Emily." "It's honest," she said, and the word carried a weight he understood right away. Alexander felt like he'd been slapped. "Emily, I know I have a lot to apologize for." "You lied," she said simply. "About everything. Who you were, what you did, why you were always around. I know. You made me feel like a fool." "I know," Alexander repeated, his voice rough, "and I'm sorry. More than you can imagine." Emily studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit Margaret would have recognized instantly. Because for the first time in my life, someone was looking at me as just Alex. Not Alexander Reed, the CEO. Not someone with power or money. You saw me as me. "But you weren't just Alex," Emily said. "You were Alexander Reed pretending to be Alex. That's different." "You're right," Alexander admitted. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd change toward me. That you'd treat me like everyone else does. With fear, forced respect, or interest in what I could offer you." He paused, searching for the right words. "I've never had someone see me as just a regular person. I've never had someone laugh at my jokes, tell me their stories, kiss me just because they wanted to, not because I was important." Emily stayed silent, taking in his words. "Emily," Alexander went on, "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but would you give me a chance to be honest now? Completely honest?" For the first time since they'd met, Emily smiled. It was a small, cautious smile, but it was there. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, Alexander, but I'm willing to listen." Alexander felt a wave of relief. "That's more than I deserve." "Much more," Emily agreed, though there was a hint of humor in her voice. They talked for another hour, sitting on a small bench in the back of the gallery. Alexander told her about his childhood, how he became a CEO so young, how he had built emotional walls around himself. Emily spoke about the past 2 months, how she found work teaching piano, and how she'd missed him despite the anger. "Emily," Alexander said as the evening came to an end, "I'd like you to come back to the company. I can offer you a better position, something in music therapy, or—" "No," Emily gently interrupted. "Thank you, but no. People would say you're giving me special treatment because of personal interest. And they'd be right." Alexander nodded, understanding. "Then, can we see each other? Outside of work? Like regular people?" Emily hesitated, then took his phone and typed in her number. "I promise not to disappear again," she said, "but that doesn't mean things will go back to how they were." "I understand," Alexander said. "Can I start over?" Emily looked at him, weighing his sincerity. "I think everyone deserves a second chance," she finally said. even lying CEOs. Alexander laughed, a real sound of relief. Thank you, Emily. I promise this time will be different. It better be, Emily said, but she was smiling when she said it. When they parted that night, both of them knew things would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, it could become something even better. In the 3 weeks that followed their reunion at the gallery, Emily and Alexander settled into a peculiar routine. They met 2 or 3 times a week for walks in Boston Common, lunch at small cafes, or just to sit on park benches and watch people go by. It felt strange, like they were getting to know each other for the first time. Alexander was being carefully honest about everything, from his food preferences to his obsessive habits. Emily, in turn, kept testing this new version of him, asking direct questions and watching his reactions closely. So, Emily asked one sunny afternoon as they walked along Newbury Street, "When you were a kid, what were you most afraid of?" Alexander thought for a moment. "Being forgotten," he answered truthfully. "And you?" "Being alone forever," Emily said. "Funny how some fears never change, huh?" They stopped in front of a bookstore window and Emily pointed to a book about gardening. "Do you have plants?" "I have a rooftop garden," Alexander admitted. "My one embarrassing confession is that I talk to the plants." Emily laughed. "That's not embarrassing. I talk to my reflection in the mirror every morning. She's a great listener, never disagrees with me." It was in moments like that when Alexander remembered why he had fallen in love with her. Emily had a way of turning any situation into something light and fun. It was during one of those pleasant afternoons that Emily's past decided to resurface in an unexpected way. They were sitting at a small cafe in the North End when Emily heard someone call her name. She turned around and saw a tall man with blonde hair and a wide smile walking toward their table. "Emily Carter." The man exclaimed, "I can't believe it's you." Emily stood up, surprised but smiling. "Frank Morrison. Oh my goodness, it's been so long." Alexander watched as Emily hugged the newcomer. Frank was clearly attractive, with that easy charm Alexander had never quite possessed. He wore casual but well-fitted clothes and had the kind of natural confidence that came from always being well received. "Frank, this is Alexander," Emily said, gesturing between the two men. "Alexander, this is Frank. We grew up together at St. Catherine's." "Ah, the famous Alexander," Frank said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily's told me about you." Alexander shook his hand, noticing the firm and slightly prolonged grip. "Frank?" he said politely. "Mind if I join you?" Frank asked, already pulling up a chair before getting an answer. "Emily, you won't believe the coincidence. I'm running a new music school here in Boston, focused on education for underserved communities. When I heard you were teaching piano, I thought of you right away." Emily perked up. "Really? What kind of school?" "It's called Harmony House," Frank explained, clearly enthusiastic. "We offer free classes for low-income children, music therapy, even a scholarship program for conservatories. It's exactly the kind of thing you always dreamed of doing." Alexander saw the genuine interest in Emily's eyes and felt a sting of something he didn't like to admit. Jealousy. "Sounds like a great program," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "It's fantastic," Frank agreed. "And Emily would be perfect to lead our piano department. The salary's good, the benefits are excellent, and she'd be making a difference in the lives of hundreds of kids." "Frank, that sounds amazing," Emily said, "but you don't even know if I'm qualified for something like that." "Emily, I've known you since you were 6, Frank said, leaning forward. "I know what you can do. Remember when you taught little Susie at the orphanage? She was so traumatized she wouldn't talk to anyone, but after 2 weeks playing music with you, she was singing again." Alexander watched the conversation, feeling more and more like an outsider. Frank and Emily shared a history he could never be part of. They had memories, shared experiences, a foundation built on years of friendship. "How about dinner tomorrow?" Frank suggested. "I can show you the school, introduce you to the rest of the team. I'm sure you're going to love it." Emily looked at Alexander, as if asking for permission or advice. "Well, of course," Alexander said quickly. "Sounds like a great opportunity." "Great," Frank said. "And Alexander, you should come too. After all, Emily always tells me how supportive you've been." There was something in Frank's tone that Alexander didn't like, but he nodded. "I'd be happy to." The next evening, the three of them met at a modest Italian restaurant in the North End. Frank had picked the place, and Alexander immediately noticed it was the kind of restaurant Emily would feel comfortable in. Casual, cozy, without the pressure of the upscale places Alexander usually dined at. Dinner started well, with Frank telling funny stories about the school and Emily laughing genuinely. Alexander tried to join the conversation, but felt out of place. Frank and Emily spoke a shared language of memories he couldn't understand. That's when Frank decided to make it personal. "You know, Emily," Frank said, twirling pasta on his fork, "you've always been too independent for your own good. Remember when you turned down help from the Johnson family who wanted to adopt you? You said you didn't need rescuing." Emily blushed slightly. "Frank, I'm just saying some things never change," Frank continued, looking directly at Alexander. "You don't need a prince to save you, Emily. Some people only care about flowers once they've already bloomed." The silence that followed was tense. Alexander felt the blood rushing to his face, but kept his voice calm when he replied. "And some people think charity makes them worthy of something they'll never have," he said, his tone icy. Frank laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I guess the difference is that I've always been here. You just showed up." "Frank," Emily said, clearly uncomfortable. Alexander stood up from the table abruptly, his patience finally gone. "Emily, let's go," he said, his voice low but firm. To his surprise and relief, Emily stood up without hesitation. "Frank, thank you for the dinner and the offer," she said politely. "I'll think about the position." "Emily, wait," Frank began, but she was already walking out of the restaurant with Alexander. The drive was quiet, heavy with unspoken tension. Alexander drove through the familiar streets of Boston, trying to process what had just happened. Frank had been right about one thing. He had come into Emily's life late. But that didn't mean he didn't belong there. When they stopped in front of the modest building where Emily lived, Alexander finally broke the silence. "Emily," he began, turning to look at her. His voice was thick with emotion, vulnerable in a way she had rarely heard. "I know all of this is strange. I'm strange. I haven't understood what's been happening to me since the first moment I saw you. On that bench." Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the streetlights. "I just know that you're the person I've been waiting for." "Even if I didn't know I was waiting," Alexander went on, taking her hands in his. "I've never felt this good around anyone before. I'm not good with words, but it's you, Emily. It's always been you." For a moment, Emily just looked at him, studying his face in the soft light inside the car. Then, without saying a word, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a different kiss from the one they had shared before. That one had been discovery, surprise, unexplained chemistry. This one was a choice. It was Emily saying, without needing words, that no matter what past she shared with Frank, no matter the complications or uncertainties, she was choosing Alexander. When they pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me," he said, "even knowing how complicated I am." Emily smiled, touching his face gently. "Alexander Reed," she said, "you might be a lot of things, but boring isn't one of them." Rain tapped insistently against the window of the small bedroom Emily shared with her two roommates. It was one of those gray Boston afternoons that made you want to hide under a blanket with a cup of hot chocolate. Emily had come home early from her piano lessons. 3 students had canceled because of the weather. "Well," she said to herself, looking around the messy room, "since I'm here, I might as well pretend to be a tidy person." She started by picking up the clothes scattered on the chair, then organized the sheet music piled on the floor. That's when she picked up her old backpack, the one that had been with her through the tough job hunting days, and realized how heavy it was. "Oh my goodness," she muttered, shaking the bag. "What am I carrying in here? Lucky rocks?" Emily flipped the bag upside down on the bed, emptying everything out. Out came pens with no ink, crumpled papers, some old candy she had forgotten about, and in the middle of it all, a small box she didn't remember packing. It was a simple metal box, rusted, with a latch that barely worked. Emily picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of memories before she even opened it. "Where have you been hiding?" she asked the box, as if it might answer. When she finally managed to open the latch, Emily found a few childhood treasures she had saved from the orphanage: a small teddy bear missing one eye, some letters from other kids, and at the bottom, a faded photograph. Emily picked up the photo with trembling fingers. It was a black and white picture, clearly old, showing two children sitting side by side on a wooden bench. The girl, with uneven braids and a toothy smile, was holding a small music box. The boy next to her, with messy dark hair and a wide, genuine grin, had one arm protectively around her shoulders. On the back of the photo, someone had written in childish handwriting, "Emily and Josh, best friends forever, 1995. Emily felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the picture. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. She looked closer at the boy in the photo. The eyes, the shape of his face, even the way he smiled. His left cheek lifted just a bit higher. It was exactly how Alexander smiled when he was truly happy. A flood of memories hit her mind like a dam had broken. She remembered the hours they spent hiding in the orphanage attic, listening to the soft melody of the music box Mrs. Patterson had given them. She remembered Josh making up fantastic stories to distract her when she cried for a family she had never known. She remembered how he always shared his pudding with her at dinner, even when she insisted she wasn't hungry. And then came the most painful memory of all: the day Josh's adoptive parents came to take him home. She remembered standing at the window, watching him get into the car with a beautiful family that promised to give him everything he deserved. Josh had turned and waved at her, shouting that he'd come back for her. She never saw him again. "Josh," Emily whispered, tears beginning to fall. "My Josh?" But there was a piece that didn't fit the puzzle: the name. Alexander wasn't Josh, or was he? Emily jumped up from the bed, still holding the photo. She couldn't stay still. She needed answers. She needed to see Alexander. She needed to know if her mind wasn't playing tricks on her. Without even thinking to grab an umbrella, Emily ran out of the apartment. The rain soaked her instantly, but she barely noticed. She ran through Boston's slippery streets, dodging pedestrians and splashing through puddles. "Excuse me, sorry," she called out as she rushed past people who looked at her like she was crazy. Romantic emergency. When she reached the Reed Enterprises building, Emily was completely soaked and out of breath. The security guard at the front desk looked at her with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need help?" "I need to see Alexander Reed," Emily said between gasps. It's urgent." "Mr. Reed is in a meeting. Please," Emily said, holding out the wet photograph. "It's about this. He'll want to see me, I promise." Something in her voice convinced the guard to make the call. After a brief conversation, he directed her to the elevator. "Top floor," he said. "Good luck, ma'am." Emily rode the elevator up with her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the whole building could hear it. When the doors opened on the top floor, she saw Alexander standing in front of the window in his office, looking out over the rainy city below. He looked lost in thought, and there was a sadness in his posture that Emily recognized instantly. "Alexander," she said softly. He turned, surprised to see her there, soaked and shivering, holding something in her hands. "Emily, what happened? You're soaking wet?" Do you remember this?" Emily asked, holding out the photo with trembling hands. Alexander stepped closer and took the picture. Emily watched his expression shift completely. First surprise, then disbelief, and finally an emotion so pure and deep it brought tears to his eyes. How do you have this photo?" he asked, his voice hoarse and unsteady. Alexander's eyes filled with tears as he looked from the photo to Emily, then back again. "So it's you, Emily? My Emily?" Emily nodded, unable to speak. Tears streamed freely down her face. Then Alexander smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face, transforming him into the 8-year-old boy from the photo. You're my Millie." Without a word, they embraced. It was a hug filled with years of longing, of silent searching, of a bond that had never truly been broken. Emily clung to Alexander as if afraid he'd disappear again. "But how is this possible?" Emily asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Your name was Josh." Alexander held her tighter, breathing in the scent of her hair. "My adoptive parents gave me a new name when they adopted me. Joshua Reed became Alexander Reed," he explained, his voice filled with emotion. "But in my heart, I always knew something was missing. I've spent my whole life searching for you, Millie, even without knowing exactly where to look. So, have I, Emily whispered. I've always felt like a part of me was lost somewhere. Alexander pulled back slightly to look at her face. The music box, that night on the bench, I didn't know why, but something made me give you that box. It was our box, Millie, the one Mrs. Patterson gave us. Emily laughed through her tears, and I played that song on the piano because my fingers remembered, even when my mind couldn't. Fate, Alexander said, wiping the tears from her face with his thumbs. Or maybe it's just true love that always finds its way back. At that moment, standing in the middle of Alexander's office, soaked from the rain and from their tears, all the mistakes, fears, and lies of the past completely lost their meaning. The CEO who never smiled had found the girl who never stopped fighting. Josh had finally come back for his Millie, just like he had promised so many years ago. And this time, they would never be apart again. The next morning, Emily woke up thinking it had all been a vivid dream. But when she looked at the nightstand and saw the faded photograph still there, she knew it was real. Josh had come back. Alexander was Josh. And she finally understood why she had always felt connected to him since that first night on the bench. The phone rang around 10 in the morning. "Good morning, Millie," said Alexander's familiar voice, and Emily smiled hearing her childhood nickname. "Good morning, Josh," she replied, testing how it felt to say his original name out loud. "It still feels strange to think you're real." "I have a proposal for you," Alexander said. "How about dinner tonight? I have something special planned." Emily hesitated. "Alexander, if it's one of those fancy restaurants where I have to decode the menu in French, I'm going to pretend I'm sick." Alexander laughed. "Trust me, it'll be perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. "All right, but if I feel out of place, I'm leaving and getting a hot dog on the street." That evening, Emily spent an hour trying to pick out something to wear. Nothing felt right for a dinner with a CEO who also happened to be her childhood best friend and possible romantic interest. "Too formal," she said, tossing a dress on the bed. "Too casual. I don't know, just too much." She finally chose a simple navy blue dress, the same one she had worn at the gallery where they saw each other again. When Alexander arrived to pick her up, he drove toward a part of Boston Emily didn't recognize. They stopped in front of a small Italian restaurant that looked closed. Alexander," Emily said, looking around. "I think your fancy restaurant is closed." "Actually," said Alexander, stepping out of the car with a mysterious smile, "it's not." He led her to the entrance, where a maitre d' was waiting for them. When the doors opened, Emily was speechless. The entire dining room was empty, except for one table in the center. But it wasn't the table that impressed her. It was the walls, decorated with old sheet music, candles scattered everywhere creating a warm golden light, and in the center of the table, her favorite childhood music box. "Alexander Reed," Emily said slowly. "You rented out an entire restaurant?" "Technically, I bought the whole dinner," he corrected. "And before you say it's too over the top, just remember, I've been your best friend for over 20 years. I'm allowed to do ridiculously romantic things." Emily laughed, feeling her eyes well up with tears. "You were always dramatic, even when we were kids." They sat down, and Emily opened the music box. The familiar melody began to play, and she felt like she was being transported back to those days at the orphanage, when music had been her refuge. "Emily," Alexander said after they finished the main course, "do you remember what I promised when I was adopted?" "You said you'd come back for me," Emily replied, smiling sadly. "But we were kids, Alexander. Kids make promises they can't keep." "Some promises just take longer to keep," Alexander said, standing up from his chair. And then, to Emily's complete shock, he got down on one knee next to the table. "Alexander, what are you doing?" she asked, her heart pounding. Instead of pulling out a velvet box, Alexander took out a folded piece of paper, written in her own careful handwriting. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "Or should I say Millie, my best friend, my favorite person in the whole world." Emily was already crying before he even finished the sentence. Alexander unfolded the paper and read, "Do you want to live every day with me like it's our new beginning?" Emily couldn't hold back her emotions. Tears streamed down her face, but she was also laughing, a mix of joy and disbelief. "Is this a marriage proposal?" she asked, her voice breaking with emotion. It's a life proposal, Alexander replied, his own eyes shining with tears. It's a promise that we'll spend the rest of our lives making up for lost time and creating new memories. Without hesitation, Emily slid down from her chair and knelt in front of him, holding Alexander's face in her hands. Joshua Reed, she said, using his full name, it took you 20 years to keep your promise. Sorry for the delay, he said, smiling. Emily kissed him then, a kiss full of every unspoken promise, all the years of waiting and all the hopes for the future. It was a kiss that said yes, before she even spoke the word. When they pulled apart, Emily was still holding his face. Yes, she said clearly. Yes, I want to live every day like it's our fresh start. But, she paused dramatically, I have one condition. Alexander looked a bit nervous. What is it? I get to choose the ceremony music, Emily said with a playful smile. And it won't be anything traditional. It's going to be our psalm, the music box one. Alexander laughed, a pure sound of relief and happiness. I'll agree to any condition you want as long as you say yes. Then it's official, Emily said, still kneeling on the floor of the empty restaurant. Emily Carter is going to marry Joshua Alexander Reed. Who would have thought the girl who soaked the CEO's shoes would end up marrying him? Technically, Alexander said, helping her to her feet, you've been marrying me since we were 6 years old. It just took us a while to figure it out. They laughed together like two kids who had finally found each other after a long game of hide-and-seek. There, surrounded by candles and sheet music, with the music box playing its special tune, Emily and Alexander began composing the melody of their future together. And this time, no one would tear them apart again. 3 months after the proposal at the restaurant, Emily stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting for the 10th time the simple veil that had once belonged to her piano teacher at the orphanage, Mrs. Patterson. Stop fussing with that veil, said Sarah, her roommate who was acting as maid of honor. You're going to end up tearing it. I can't help it, Emily admitted, her hands trembling slightly. Sarah, I'm getting married in the little church where I grew up, to my childhood best friend who also happens to be a millionaire CEO. If that's not a reason to be nervous, I don't know what is. It's a reason to be happy, Sarah corrected her, adjusting the flowers in Emily's hair. And a reason to stop pinching yourself. You're getting all red. Outside, Emily could hear the sound of children laughing and chatting. Alexander had insisted the wedding take place at St. Catherine's home, the orphanage where they met. The current pastor, Reverend Williams, had been touched by their story and offered the small chapel for the ceremony. Emily, called a familiar voice from the hallway. Can I come in? Come in, Stella. Stella Peterson, Emily's friend from her job-searching days, entered the room holding a simple bouquet of daisies and white roses. Oh my goodness, Emily, Stella said, her eyes filling with tears. You look radiant. I'm trying not to throw up from nerves, Emily confessed. Does that count as radiant? Definitely, Stella laughed. And just wait until you see how nervous your groom is downstairs. He's already adjusted his tie like 15 times. Emily smiled, feeling some of the butterflies in her stomach settle down. It was comforting to know Alexander was just as nervous as she was. The small chapel at the orphanage had been decorated with simplicity and love. White ribbons and wildflowers adorned the wooden pews, and at the altar, simple candles created a warm, welcoming atmosphere. There was no luxury or extravagance, just love and hope filling every corner. The guests were few but special. Sarah and Stella, a few close friends of Emily's, Margaret, Alexander's secretary, and Alexander's adoptive parents, Robert and Helen Reed. They had immediately embraced Emily as family, insisting she call them Mom Helen and Dad Robert. And seated in the front pews were a dozen children from the orphanage, all dressed in their best clothes, holding simple musical instruments. When the moment came, Emily heard the familiar tune of the music box, only this time it was being played by a small group. Some children with recorders, others with triangles and xylophones, all playing with sweet concentration. It's your time, dear, said Helen Reed, who had insisted on walking Emily down the aisle since she had no parents to do the honor. Emily took Helen's arm and began walking down the small aisle. She wore a simple white satin dress she had found at a second-hand shop, but it had been altered with such care that it looked like it had been made just for her. When her eyes met Alexander's at the altar, Emily felt like the whole world made sense. He stood there in his simple but elegant tuxedo, holding the original music box, the very one he had left with her that night on the bench. His hands trembled slightly, and Emily could see tears of emotion in his eyes. "Wow," Alexander whispered when she reached the altar. "You look wow. Is that your official statement?" Emily asked, laughing softly. "Because I can ask the Reverend to repeat the vows if you want to elaborate." "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," Alexander said, correcting himself. "And the funniest, and the most amazing, and—" Okay, Emily interrupted, smiling. "Save some sweet words for the official vows." Reverend Williams, a kind 60-year-old man who knew their story, began the ceremony with a voice full of emotion. "Dear friends," he said, "we are here today to witness something truly miraculous. A love that began in childhood, was separated by time and distance, but found its way back." During the vows, both Emily and Alexander cried openly. They had written their own promises, and the words were simple but deep. "I promise," Emily said, holding Alexander's hands, "to be your best friend, your adventure partner, and your favorite person to talk to about totally random things at 3 in the morning." "I promise," Alexander replied, "to protect your heart the same way you protected mine when we were kids, and I promise never to lie about who I am again, because with you, I can simply be Josh." When the Reverend asked for the rings, Alexander opened the music box. Inside, where the little ballerina used to be, were 2 simple gold rings. "With this ring," Alexander said, sliding the band onto Emily's finger, "I promise you my heart, my life, and all my tomorrows." "With this ring," Emily replied, "I promise you that our story is only just beginning." "By the power vested in me," Reverend Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Alexander, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, full of promises and a joy that seemed to overflow. The orphanage children clapped and shouted with happiness, and even Margaret was quietly wiping away tears. During the small reception in the orphanage garden, Emily noticed Stella chatting animatedly with someone. As she got closer, she saw it was Frank, who had shown up to greet her and congratulate the couple. "Stella was telling me about her work with special needs children," Frank was saying, clearly interested. "It's fascinating." Emily and Alexander exchanged amused glances. The chemistry between Stella and Frank was undeniable. "Well," Emily whispered to Alexander, "looks like we're not the only ones who believe in new beginnings." Alexander smiled, pulling her closer. "Life has a funny way of putting the right people in the right place, doesn't it?" "It really does," Emily agreed, looking around at the children playing, the friends chatting, and the man who had been her best friend, then her lost love, and was now her husband. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," one of the orphanage children said, tugging at their hands, "are you going to have kids like us?" Emily and Alexander laughed, looking at each other with that perfect understanding only people who've known each other a lifetime can share. "Who knows?" Emily said, squeezing Alexander's hand. "The future is full of possibilities." And as the sun set over Boston, Emily and Alexander danced for the first time as husband and wife, to the same melody that had connected 2 young hearts so many years ago. What did you think of Emily and Alexander's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow all our stories and enjoy more emotional stories by clicking right here on the final screen.